Last night, a whole host of individuals from Sangamon County and the area attended a forum talking about CO2 pipelines, and it was a packed room. You heard opponents, you heard supporters. What's a take that State Senator Steve McClure has? He joins us now here with Springfield's Morning News on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. Senator, thanks for taking time and connecting via Zoom. What did you hear last night? Give us kind of a flavor of the crowd, so to speak.
Well, certainly the crowd was largely against the pipeline. It was a packed house in the basement of the BOS Center, and really the concerns of the public were about safety. What if the pipeline ruptures? What if I don't want it on my property? Then what? Those were the lingering questions from the members of the audience. And I don't believe that the folks that are promoting the pipeline, trying to get the pipeline built, have done an adequate job of answering those concerns. And this has been going on a while now. And the fact that those concerns are still not answered is something that should make everyone who's a supporter of this project pause.
So they had, of course, the pipeline proponents there, the people who are looking to and applying for having this pipeline come from multiple states away, hundreds of miles piped through, coming to Illinois with a concentrated form of CO2 gas that is then expected to be piped into the ground, deep into the ground. What are some of the reasons you're hearing for this? Because I'm hearing environmental concerns. We need to get CO2 out of the atmosphere. I'm hearing that we could possibly use concentrated CO2 for some kind of newfangled energy development. What was the pipeline proponents? What was their message last night?
It's environmental. This is very good for the environment if this is done in this particular manner. But remember also, there are a lot of tax incentives right now for companies to utilize this technology to do this. And companies run based upon financial incentives, let's face it. And so I would say that would be a big driver of anyone doing some sort of a project like this, because right now under the Biden administration, he's giving people a lot of money to do these sorts of projects. But I mean, look at what happened in Mississippi. There was a pipeline that ruptured. Over 40 people were sent to the hospital. 300 people were evacuated. And that caused, at the federal level, discussions about changing what the policies are, what the procedures are for CO2 pipelines. The feds are supposed to come back with some new regulations, some new policies to ensure that these pipelines are safe. And that's why I filed a bill in the Senate to ensure that no pipeline is built until after those federal guidelines come out.
We're talking with State Senator Steve McClure here with Springfield's Morning News after last night's CO2 pipeline conversation where he had proponents and opponents there. Of course, you kind of characterized some of what the proponents had to say, but I guess recharacterize what the opponents had to say.
People are concerned about the safety of these pipelines, and lots of the discussion is centered around, well, if it's not in your backyard, why do you care? The reason why people care is because if a pipeline ruptures, the area of damage is very widespread, and it would pose significant risks to the health of everyone in a very large area. And this pipeline affects several counties, and it spreads very far. The opponent said it's the largest pipeline in the country, actually in the world, if this project is completed. And that puts a lot of people in danger. And if a CO2 pipeline ruptures and that goes out of the ground and into the air, it sucks away the oxygen. It makes it so that people can't breathe. It makes it so that cars that are gas-powered cars can't operate unless they're electric vehicles. And therefore, particularly in the rural areas, how is an electric vehicle going to get to these scenes in time? The warnings that folks are going to have to get out are not going to be long. It's going to be like 3 minutes or 5 minutes or something like that. If it happens in the middle of the night, how is a person supposed to get out of their house in time? And so these are real legitimate safety issues. And all of these, while the folks that are the proponents of the pipeline say these are not going to be concerns that are real concerns because we're going to take care of it, I don't believe that they have provided enough information as to the safety protocols that will be in place to ensure that this will not happen. And there's just too many ruptures with all kinds of pipelines every year to guarantee that this will not happen. And so it's a concern. And it's not just a concern about the health and safety of the people that it would be in the path of the pipeline. There are also concerns about the potential damage, permanent damage to farmland and to property, and the fact that some people just don't want a pipeline on their property or near their property, no matter how far underground it is. So these are legitimate concerns. These raise constitutional issues as well about, where property begins, what control a person has over their property, how far underground does it go, that sort of thing. So it's been a very interesting debate, and the concerns of the people that are against the pipeline are legitimate concerns that I think most people would have if this pipeline was going to be built near them.
Yeah, and if anybody's seen what CO2 a pipeline rupture looks like, if you haven't, I encourage you to go check it out, because it's not something that, just goes straight up in the air and then it just continues upward. No, CO2 is very heavy, so once it comes out of the pipeline, it lays very low to the ground and just continues to dissipate outwards, kind of like a dry ice effect, if you can imagine that. So some interesting things to consider in all of this, as the policymakers, even the ICC has recommended not to move forward with this one particular proposal. Senator, there's another proposal out there, though. We've got the Navigator proposal that was talked about last night, but you've got the Wolf and ADM proposal. That's also something that's looking to cut through here. Do you think that enough of the, environmental groups and those concerned about property rights, do you think that that's going to be enough of a coalition of sorts to keep these things at bay?
At the moment, I do. And if you look at the Navigator pipeline versus the pipeline that you just referenced, it really has been about the contact that the companies have had with the actual landowners involved. On this particular pipeline, the Navigator pipeline, less than 10% of people that would be impacted by the pipeline have agreed to allow the pipeline to go on their property and move forward. In the other pipeline, I've been told that they're doing different things to ensure that the public is going to be more supportive. I guess that's yet to be seen, but I think the reactions of the individual landowners are key here, because they're going to be the ones affected by this, and the people in the surrounding parcels of land. Those are going to be the most affected by this. So it's going to be the reaction that the folks have that are going to be affected that's going to make the difference here.
State Senator Steve McClure with us. While I've got you, totally unrelated to pipelines, we've got a ruling expected out of the Illinois Supreme Court today on the Pretrial Fairness Act portion of the Safety Act. This was supposed to go into effect January 1st, but after Kankakee County State's Attorney joined with other state's attorneys across the state to sue the state from implementing this, it was held up, and the state Supreme Court heard it in March. What do you think is going to happen today? Give us both sides here. What if the Supreme Court upholds the Pretrial Fairness Act and cash bail is eliminated statewide? What do you think happens? Or on the other side, what do you think happens if they strike down the Pretrial Fairness Act?
Well, number one, I watched the oral arguments before the Supreme Court, and essentially the argument is that if the Safety Act takes effect, our state's constitution is changed, because there are sureties mentioned in the state's constitution, and sureties are really a different way of saying bond. So eliminating these sureties, or the bond that a person is allowed to provide if they are temporarily put in jail, to release them, eliminating those from our state's constitution would be changing the constitution, and you cannot do that without going to the voters. And the Supreme Court struck down a few years ago the Fair Maps Amendment. Even though it had passed both houses, the timeline did not allow for it under our state's constitution for the change. So, the right thing to do is to rule that this this change in our state's constitution was unconstitutional because of the fact that the voters did not have the chance to weigh in. Because if the voters had weighed in, no matter what part of the state you poll, they were against the Safety Act. They are against the Safety Act. So the right side would win here. So if this loses, I would say that if the Safety Act does go into effect, I would say that's a devastating blow to the credibility of our state Supreme Court, period. We just had an election in which Governor Pritzker gave $1 million to two different candidates for the Supreme Court. I'm sorry, but those two justices should not be ruling on any case involving any major piece of legislation from Governor Pritzker, period. That is an obscene amount for one person who just happens to be governor to give to the Supreme Court while they are weighing massive cases from the governor's playbook, from the governor's main things that he wanted to get accomplished. So that's the first thing. So now what happens if it goes into effect? Well, I can tell you that because of the huge outcry from people across the state, there were major changes done to the Safety Act. If you recall, Greg, I had a huge town hall in Springfield where there were protesters that interrupted me. They put propaganda on cars. It was the Faith Coalition for the Common Good, and they put propaganda on all the vehicles talking about all the things that I was pointing out in the town hall were lies. They were not true. And yet a lot of the things that I pointed out in the town hall that were on those sheets were changed in the Safety Act. And so I think I would ask the question for the Faith Coalition of the Common Good, if I was lying about those things, why were many of those things changed in amendments? And the answer is because I wasn't lying. And the propaganda from the other side of this was just ridiculous. And so things have been changed, but there are still bad things in the Safety Act. And you've got things like if a person burglarizes a motor vehicle, they will no longer be able to be detained at all. And look at, Greg, over the last year, just year to year, what has been happening with car burglaries and burglaries of garages and things. The ability of law enforcement to arrest these people and keep them in jail is what helps to keep us safe. The fact that these people are committing these crimes at such a high rate right now, and law enforcement will no longer be able to hold them in jail, that's very, very troubling for everyone in this state, including the Chicago area, where car burglaries are a huge problem, car thefts are a huge problem. And so things like that in this are going to make us a less safe state at a time when our state is really, really in trouble with very, very bad crime. So if it goes into effect, it's going to be very bad. If it gets thrown out, it's a huge win for the citizens of our state, particularly the citizens all across this state who are fighting and trying to fight and stay safe from record crime.
State Senator Steve McClure, thanks so much for taking time with us today. We'll definitely be checking back in with you in the near future, and a whole bunch more stuff I imagine is going to be popping over the summer with legislation being signed, and then you got the state fair and all of that. So I appreciate your time this morning. We'll connect again soon, all right?
Thanks, Greg.
It is Springfield's Morning News on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk, and much more coming up.